let's bring on Marc Hendrick. He is the president and CEO of Plus Therapeutics. Marc, can you see or hear me?
Hey, Spencer. How exciting. I thought I was going to win.
No, sadly, you were not entered and you did not win. There's always next time, though. We have Marc's slides. Let's get Marc's slides on the screen, guys. There we go. Marc, take us home. Final presentation of the day, Plus Therapeutics. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Appreciate it, Spencer. Good afternoon, everyone. Spencer said I'm Marc Hendrick, President and CEO of Plus Therapeutics. Please remember to review my comments in the light of our forward-looking statement language on slide 2. Plus is a company that's focused on developing targeted radiotherapeutics for patients battling rare and CNS cancers. Why should we go after CNS and rare cancers? Well, most important, they represent a very significant unmet medical need. And even though these diseases are rare individually, in aggregate, they represent a very sizable patient population. And also because of the biological similarities of these diseases, you get some economies of scale because one drug can treat a different CNS malignancy. So glioblastoma is a type of brain cancer and is a prime example of a serious rare CNS disease that is incurable with very poor treatment options.
Glioblastoma, also known as GBM, is a rare, incurable brain cancer with almost 12,000 cases diagnosed each year. It can cause headaches, seizures, paralysis, vision changes, and other neurological complications. Sadly, the 5-year survival rate is less than 10%. Despite the best available medical treatments to eliminate the initial brain tumor, some microscopic disease frequently remains, with tumor regrowth within months. Depending on the grade, size, and shape of the tumor and prior treatments administered, doctors may suggest additional therapies, participation in a clinical trial, or best supportive care to treat the recurrence. Unfortunately, there are no good treatment options for tumor recurrence. Available treatments may only provide about 10 months additional survival and often have serious side effects. Recurrent glioblastoma patients and healthcare providers alike seek better alternatives.
In our currently open clinical trial called RESPECT, we and the doctors that are treating these patients with our lead drug, RNL 186, are seeing substantial biological effects on the tumors. For example, here's a patient treated with RNL, preoperatively showing the large recurrent brain tumor in white on the left side, and a clear biological response to the tumor in an involuted shrunken tumor in gray 56 days after treatment with RNL. This is exactly what one would want to see with a treatment that was working against glioblastoma. But achieving an improvement in clinical outcomes in GBM patients has been very challenging. And in patients like the one I just showed you, as a practical matter, much more is required than just producing the drug itself. In fact, we have assembled an innovative ecosystem of technologies across many medical specialties in areas of engineering and scientific innovation. But let me talk about the drug for a moment, because that's the critical commercial element for the company. Our lead drug is RNL 186. It is a nanoparticle or nanoscale drug that's much bigger than most drugs and is a unique combination of isotopic rhenium that's made in a nuclear reactor, then chelated onto 100 nanometer liposomes for delivery into patients. Isotopic rhenium is the active agent in a very unique isotope. And stated simply, it delivers very high doses of radiation that overwhelm the DNA repair mechanisms of cancer cells, causing what's called mitotic catastrophe and ultimately cell death, while seeming to spare more normal cells and tissues. It's also unique and that besides cancer killing, it also emits a low energy imaging particle that is essential in assuring that the RNL is delivered to the proper location in the brain and in the right dose, as I'll show you in a moment. And thus far, we've seen encouraging safety and potential efficacy signals in patients with recurrent glioblastoma following high-dose therapy with our lead drug, RNL. The company's pipeline of drugs consists of 4 investigational drugs. Our lead drug, rhenium nanoliposomes, is in phase 1 for recurrent glioblastoma or GBM. with new additional CNS indications in development. We also have an earlier stage development program for a therapeutic combination of isotopic rhenium with a potent chemotherapeutic. And finally, we have 2 other clinical stage chemotherapeutics for which we are seeking licensing partners. Once delivered to the brain, RNL acts in a very unique manner. Specifically, the liposomal encapsulation of the isotopic rhenium increases its half-life from about 5 hours, this is in the graph on the upper left, to 90 hours, such that it's retained in the tumor site for weeks, and the radiation just keeps pounding away at the tumor for days and days. Additionally, our formulation provides predictable dispersion characteristics in the tumor and adjacent brain tissue where microscopic cancer cells tend to lurk that are responsible for tumor recurrences. In 2 clinically relevant animal models of brain cancer performed at the University of Texas and MD Anderson, very high doses of radiation were tolerated with no maximum dose reached, and RNL was then showed to significantly enhance survival in 2 types of xenograft models where human cells are put into rodents. And importantly, at the end of the experiment, absolutely no residual tumor was found in the treated animals. Also, in what's called the bioluminescence assay and MRI evaluation, it showed that many of the treated animals had lost the bioluminescence activity back to background levels, suggesting complete eradication of the tumor. This imaging data is consistent with the blinded histologic evaluation by a neuropathologist showing no residual disease in RNL-treated animals. On a practical level, translating RNL and the findings I just showed you from an animal into the patient and achieving precise targeted tumor delivery is only possible because of relatively recent advances in the modern clinical workflow. And specifically, we leverage advances in imaging, computer, and AI-based software algorithms, updates in the neurosurgical operating room, such as geospatial stereotactic catheter placement with 1 millimeter accuracy of the tip and the angle of the catheter, and advances in something called convection-enhanced delivery capability that allows us to put the drug on the tumor. Furthermore, the benefits over the best possible treatment for glioblastoma is external beam radiation, and that's our most relevant clinical competitor, and they're substantial.
RNL can be visualized in real time during administration, possibly giving doctors better control of radiation dosing and distribution, potentially more effectively treating the bulk tumor and microscopic disease in surrounding healthy tissue. Additionally, the RNL radiation dose delivered may be personalized to the needs of each patient and up to 15 to 20 times greater than what is possible with external beam radiation therapy, or EBRT. Using a small catheter, RNL is infused directly into the targeted tumor, which may reduce radiation exposure to healthy cells. By contrast, EBRT is less targeted and selective. RNL is given during a single 4-day inpatient hospital visit, while external beam radiation requires outpatient visits 5 days a week for 4 weeks. For recurrent glioblastoma patients, every moment counts. Timely treatment and improving quality of life are key. RNL is being evaluated in clinical trials as a one-time surgical procedure to receive a potentially safe and effective dose of radiation. If you would like to learn more about this investigational treatment and clinical trials, please visit us online.
The first-in-man trial of RNL is called RESPECT, and it's a phase 1/2 trial assessing the safety, tolerability, and distribution of 186 RNL in recurrent progressive malignant glioma. And this trial is funded to a very significant degree by the NIH, or the National Cancer Institutes, for up to 55 patients. And the 3 clinical sites on the right are on board evaluating and treating patients. Thus far, we've now treated 22 patients. No treatment-related serious adverse events have been observed, and promising efficacy signals have been noted when adequate dosing and tumor coverage was observed. As mentioned thus far, we have treated 22 patients across 8 dosing cohorts. In the most recent cohort, 12.3 cc's and 31.2 millicuries of radiation were delivered at a rate of 20 microliters per minute to the brain tumor and surrounding brain. Thus far, RNL appears to be safe and well tolerated without dose-limiting toxicities. And there are thus far no observed correlations in the treatment-related adverse events, and notably the incidence and severity does not appear to increase with increasing doses of RNL. In other words, it appears to be safe, despite the dramatic amounts of radiation we're delivering. One reason we've not seen systemic adverse events, such as ablation of the marrow or low blood counts, is that, as I showed you in the animal models, the radiation stays in the tumor and surrounding abnormal brain, and exposure outside the brain is negligible. Specifically, there's a 3,000-fold difference in radiation exposure between the brain and the body. In terms of assessing the drug delivery results, how good we are getting the drug to the tumor, it's most clinically relevant to look at cohorts 5 through 8, in which higher volumes and radiation dosages were delivered to bigger tumors. Thus far in these cohorts, we've had no delivery failures, safely delivered up to 740 gray of radiation, with a mean absorbed radiation dose of nearly 400 gray. And recall, as mentioned earlier, the typical radiation from external beam source in the recurrent setting is only about 35 gray. That's the maximum you can give with external beam radiation, and we're giving 20 times that. We have used from 1 to 4 catheters per patient, and the mean tumor coverage is about 90%. And as reported previously, 5 patients receiving prior bevacizumab therapy exhibited poor drug convection, and we have excluded further enrollment in these patients. The RESPECT dose escalation trial, though not designed as an efficacy trial, does follow the patients for overall survival, or OS. Other endpoints, such as objective response based on imaging analysis, is not possible because of the natural history of the tumor involution process that'll be obvious on follow-up MRI scans, and it's called pseudoprogression, and I'll show you that in a moment. The most relevant apples-to-apples comparative data regarding overall survival are in the longer duration initial treatment cohorts treated prior to 2020, and in which we achieved tumor coverage greater than 75% in absorbed radiation doses greater than 100 gray. And in those 5 patients, the average overall survival is currently at just under 800 days, with 2 patients still alive. Remember, the average overall survival is about 8 to 10 months in these patients. We'll continue to monitor the overall survival as well as safety and provide a full update at the Society for Neuro-Oncology meeting in Boston this November. And I'll show you a few representative cases so you can get a feel for how this therapy works. This is a patient that's still alive, patient 14, and you'll see across the top 3 different MRI scans at baseline preoperatively. And you'll see what's called their SPECT scans below in each of those different views. So one of the great things about the rhenium isotope is every 10th photon that it produces is an imaging photon. So we can see in real time, and you really see it here, how well we're covering the tumor with radiation in 3 dimensions and the intensity of that radiation. So that gives us feedback in how well we did in terms of delivery. And here the tumor was a 6.5 cc tumor, and the coverage of that was greater than 90%. And we put an absorbed average dose delivered to the tumor of 419 gray. Remember, the max you can go is about 35 gray with external beam therapy. And here's that same patient, again, still alive, and showing different MRIs of the patient on the far left before surgery, on the second panel immediately after treatment. And you can see that at about 118 days, perhaps it's gotten a little bit bigger, but that's called pseudoprogression. It's the swelling and the death of the cells that are being treated by the radiation. And then by about a year out, you see that this tumor starts to involute. And what you typically see in these patients that aren't treated or inadequately treated is this tumor will grow over the course of 60 days without treatment or with inadequate treatment, and it'll be incredibly obvious. And you're seeing with only a single treatment of RNL, you're seeing the tumor shrink. And this patient still alive is out over about 1,000 days, I think, now at this point. These are images from another patient, number 17, treated more recently, showing 87% coverage, and this patient received a dose of 336 gray. Again, you see a much larger tumor. This tumor was almost 20 cc's. You see the white area in the scans, and you see a little dark area, which is the remnant of the cavity where it was originally removed before it recurred. And you can see that the radiation cloud at 24 hours and 5 days is superimposed very nicely over the lines that represent where the original tumor was. Hence, the tumor coverage was just about 90%. And we can average the absorbed dose, and it was a little over 300 gray. This is that same patient I just showed you, showing something called the tumor perfusion maps. And you can see in the MRI scans at the top, two different cuts through the brain, the white tumor and their section cavity, which is the dark area in front of it. And you can see that the tumor had that same response that I showed you in the previous patient, where the tumor shrunk down and went dark. But in the images below, you can see that represents blood flow. You can see the loss of the blood flow from pre-treatment to day 56. Also, the company has promising data showing RNL for a number of other cancers, and 4 in which we've had published data are listed here. And 2 very difficult to treat cancers, leptomeningeal carcinomatosis and pediatric brain cancer, we feel are very attractive targets going forward for RNL. LMC affects about 110,000 patients in the US without a standard of care, and these patients die rapidly despite what care we do provide them. They live weeks oftentimes, not months or years. And this number of patients is really growing because we're doing a better and better job treating breast cancer, lung cancer, and melanoma, but we see these recurrences or new tumors pop up in and around the fluid lining of the brain. Pediatric brain cancers, although rarer than leptomeningeal disease, carry an equally poor prognosis for these kids. So the rationale for treatment in leptomeningeal cancer is that 100 nanometer liposomes like this circulate very freely in the CNS, and they're very straightforward to deliver. All of these patients get something called an Ommaya reservoir in the brain that are little ports under the skin, so we can always get access to the fluid space around the brain, so we can deliver this in a much simpler fashion than we do for glioblastoma. The treatment approach in pediatric cancer would be more like what we do for adult brain cancer, using convection-enhanced delivery and the sophisticated imaging technology that I mentioned before, with 1 or more catheters going directly into the tumor and the tumor area. What are the next steps for RNL in terms of development? So we have fast track and orphan status for our glioblastoma therapy. We think that there's a very good chance we could treat cohort 8 completely, if that indeed is the last cohort, and that really depends on the data, by the end of 2021. In the meantime, we're conducting manufacturing and scale up for the actual drugs so that we can go into what's called a phase 3 or registrational trial by around mid-2022. So we're on track to be able to have GMP drug for a approval trial potentially by the middle of next year. If that's the case, we potentially could get into a phase 3 or pivotal trial around the second half of 2022, which we anticipate will take a couple of years to enroll. Regarding leptomeningeal carcinomatosis and pediatric brain cancer, we filed an IND with the FDA for leptomeningeal cancer, and we're in the process of negotiating that. And if things go well, we could potentially treat the first patient by the end of 2021. Regarding pediatric brain cancer, that IND is on the heels of the LMC IND, and we anticipate that's probably a 2022 event, but with the possibility that we could be in the clinic in 2022 as well. So in terms of milestones for the company, as I mentioned, I'll go over these briefly. We intend to complete enrollment in our phase 1/2 trial and go to a pivotal trial as early as mid-2022. We're completing the CMC and drug development activities for a phase 3 drug supply that should be done by mid-2022. And then based on the cohort data, we could close out the phase 1 and move forward. We're also moving into phase 1 for leptomeningeal cancer and potentially pediatric brain cancer towards the end of this year and early next year. And we're also completing additional preclinical studies for RNL for different indications and a unique combination of RNL plus a chemotherapeutic. We continue to be cautiously acquisitive and looking for ways to build out our radiotherapeutic pipeline and look for partners as they emerge. Company's relatively well capitalized. We think we're a very investor-friendly company. We're very frugal. We operate virtually. The NIH grant covers the lion's share of our clinical cost. So going through 2021, we were spending about $500,000 a year. So we have about 2 or so years of cash on hand, and we have a small term principal loan that will just be paying off through 2024. It's really it's really an issue that's in the background at this point. We have a few warrants that are just about in the money or just below, and about 12 million shares as of June 30th outstanding. So with that, just thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you're welcome to reach out to myself or any of the team. And please see our social media and websites for further information. Thank you very much for your time in the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marc. There's the URL on the ticker up on the screen there. Marc Hendrick, President and CEO of Plus Therapeutics. Marc, have a great rest of your day. Thanks a lot.